Welcome to the Breaking Script podcast with Lala and Nini.
I'm Lala.
And I'm Nini.
This is the podcast where we break script with the wonderful world of Hallmark movies and occasional Asian dramas.
Today's preview episode is where we'll be breaking down for you why we are breaking scripts with Hallmark movies and that occasional Asian drama. Be patient with us because that might take us time to get into because we are officially in Hallmark season. Woohoo! Cue the cheers. There's new content galore with movies every weekend. All the feels of fall and Christmas movies are officially in the air. But don't worry, I'll be sure to include my own ABC, Asian American Taiwanese perspective so that we can get the Asian perspective conversation going. Because for someone who used to find Hallmark movies to be incredibly cringy, to the point of becoming such a fan that I low-key might even consider going to a Christmas con. You guys, I don't know if this is a common response. I watch these Hallmark movies now. It gets me all nostalgic. Like, who am I? And I start to have these thoughts because I'm like processing my own life and relationships in my family and extended family and my upbringing and how I grew up. And I have all these thoughts in Taiwanese. I don't know if that's normal. Because I have these like family stories and I needed someone to process with or to share with. So I look forward to sharing with Lala and my brother through Lala. And I so look forward to hearing Lala's Canadian perspective and her family stories I haven't heard yet. So anyways, this is Nini. This was my podcast idea. I'm in midst of taking a somatic trauma-informed coaching certification. So my social media feed is full of like personal growth, spiritual growth, entrepreneurship, neuroscience, like deep, intense things. But then, of course, it's totally interrupted by like foodies, comedians, any satirical memes I love. It's how I communicate with my friends, is through memes. But in the midst of like high performance coaching to recovering from complex PTSD, you guys, I needed a break from burnout recovery material, if you could believe it. Like, I love, don't get me wrong, all the overcoming stories where positive psychology meets polyvagal theory. I love stories of seeing post-traumatic growth. I'm still coming out of my own decade of being in some form of survival mode, and I definitely needed something a little bit more light and fluffy. Can I get a witness? Like something that would bring me fun and life and energy. So this is where you think fluffy eggs. And if you don't know what that is, please go back and listen to our trailer intro episode if you haven't yet to find out what we mean when we say fluffy eggs. So basically this fluffy egg adventure started with a text from Nini to Lala about midsummer of 2023, where all I said was, "Hey Lala, I have a fun idea to run past you when you have time to chat for a few minutes." Mind you, this is like in midst of a work day for her. And she texted right back. We chatted, I think, over her lunch break. Yep. I proceeded to spam her with Deck the Hallmark podcast episodes and Tyler Hines podcast episodes where he's been a guest. By 5:30 p.m., y'all, she had texted me back and said, "I'm really excited. Your brother loves the idea." What? I was shocked. So Lala, tell us what you really thought when I first pitched it to you.
Well, I have to say, I am a podcast fanatic. Like, I don't listen to music. I mean, I love music, but 90% of the time I am always listening to a podcast. So I was really excited. I was a little bit nervous about it being Hallmark because at least in my sphere here in Canada, Hallmark is just not that big of a deal, right? Like, yeah, we don't have a dedicated Hallmark channel. Like, we have our own network that will play Hallmark stuff, but there's no Hallmark channel. So it's just not the way that it is in the States. The only time I'm really watching a Hallmark movie, if I can even say watching, would be at Nana's house, and it's on in the background. Now, Nana loves Hallmark movies, but to me, it's warm and cozy on in the background, specifically during the holidays. So that was kind of my, that's my involvement with the Hallmark. Like, I like them, I know about them, I think they're cute, but no expert here. I was really excited.
I love it. It's so funny because I feel like it's so backwards for me to be the one coming to you and be like, "Hey, let's start a Hallmark podcast." Because
very true.
You still liked Hallmark movies. I totally found them cringy. So it's definitely just something, I thought it was a great idea of something to do together, because when you're long distance, when you have
Yeah.
family that's far apart, it's hard to stay connected when you don't have something that you're actually doing together. But
Yes.
also, I needed something more than diamond art, coloring, and puzzles. You and I
I
talked about this.
agree.
Like, what are other things you tried and why?
Okay. Okay. So, since we're talking about that, I am obsessed with this topic, and it kind of, I know we're going to get to the puzzling, diamond art, and all that stuff. But for me, like, I have a ton of hobbies because of therapy. We're very loud and proud here about therapy.
Yes.
Love therapy. And originally, my therapist talked to me about the window of tolerance. And if you don't know what the window
Yes.
of tolerance is, it's a concept that's coined by Daniel J. Siegel. It represents our ideal emotional state for optimal function in daily life. So, this zone is characterized by your stability, adaptability, mindfulness, and our ability to handle stress. So, when we surpass this window because of internal or external stressors, we enter into either two states, either hyper arousal, which is high energy, panic, irritability, or hypoarousal, which is when we withdraw and become numb. So the goal is to stay within the window, and that's crucial for optimal functioning within the world. The best way that my therapist put it to me is like, where is your happy place? So for me, it's Disney World. So she said, pretend you're in Disney World, think about it, and you're so happy. Okay. Your window is really open. And then all of a sudden, you get bad news. Well, say, I don't know, something bad happened, your house flooded, or I don't know, someone's mad at you. Your window will shrink, but because you're in such an optimal state, it only shrinks a little bit. Now, if you're at home and you're dealing with life and you're not taking care of yourself, your window is slowly shrinking. And when something hard or stressful comes at you, your window is very small and you're not able to function in the optimal state. That's why it becomes hard and you kind of end up in those two different states, either hypo or hyper arousal. Anyways, so when I first started therapy, I was living between those two states. I had a tiny window and I was just between hyper and hypo arousal. And so one of the things that we talked about, because you can't be on vacation all the time, is activities to help that window stay open. She, no joke, gave me a list of like 365 activities to try, one for every day of the year. And I only managed to go through like 3 or 4 because I started loving puzzling. Okay. I did crocheting. I did that yarn thing where you like stab it through a thing. I did
Oh my
diamond art. I did paint by number. Like I've done so many things, and puzzling is where I built a dollhouse for a while. I was
Oh my
building
gosh.
dollhouses,
I
and
love
even
it.
I
Yes.
wired electricity in them. Okay. Anyways, puzzling was the best for me. I have done over 50 puzzles this year. Like
That's
I
super
love to
impressive.
puzzle. I'm also like very specific about what puzzle I like to do. It drives my husband
We
nuts.
know we're
Yeah.
Ravensburger fans. I mean, come on.
Yes. My Haven series is my favorite. Anyways, okay, that is my window of tolerance. Puzzling. I still love puzzling, but this podcast is keeping my window open.
I love it. I love how windows of tolerance is becoming a more, like, there's so much more awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and some people will call it the ladder of tolerance, or traffic lights of tolerance is the way that I've learned. And it's basically, if you could think about it in this way, we hope that our podcast is, even if we have one listener, Lala's mom is still around, mine
Yep.
isn't, but maybe even if it's just Nana, we hope that our podcast is something that helps to broaden your window of tolerance. And for me, I think of it as the traffic lights of tolerance, where your red is your freeze state, right? So this is about your nervous system. Red would be freeze state, yellow would be fight or flight, and green is your dorsal, where you're in feeling safe. This is a good zone. And so we hope to help you be there. And something that I learned that I started to get curious about when I started watching Hallmark movies is when you start to study polyvagal theory and you get more aware and be more intentional about seeing where you are on that traffic lights of tolerance.
Mm.
I didn't realize that your red and green state could look awfully similar. So that like blew my mind, and we'll get more into that. If you haven't listened to our first intro episode yet, more like a preview, 10-minute commercial, please listen to our disclaimer.
Yes.
We are not experts. We are not therapists.
No.
We're just two girls on a journey, coming out of recovery and survival mode, still on that journey. So we're just sharing our experiences. But
Yeah.
what I think is really funny is before we even had a name for our podcast, I already had like a t-shirt and merch collab idea with a friend. I like got her agreement and everything. We're going to come out with a t-shirt line to help remind you to be kind to yourself, because that's the only way to broaden your window of tolerance, or to be in more of that green on your traffic lights of tolerance. So yeah, we were sitting there the first time we were recording, and we were going to start recording. And we're like, but wait, what do we say? What's the name of our podcast? Right after I told Lala about the t-shirt collab idea, and she's like, oh my gosh, I love it. So look out for t-shirt, mugs, and maybe journals and pens. But we had to ask my branding marketing genius of a brother to help with the name. And I kid you not, you guys, what was it, like 15 minutes, Lala?
Yeah, we were sitting there for longer trying to think of a name, and he walked in and was like, oh, the breaking script.
Breaking script.
We're like, love it. Okay, done.
Like going off script of what's expected in life, like breaking down the script and the writing of these movies and shows, or like my favorite, breaking script, like you're breaking bread.
Yes.
Love it, love it, love it. I feel like
love that.
Right? Such an appropriate name, so versatile. And it reminded me of how a childhood friend of mine pointed out how odd it was the way that I watch movies. Because when I'm watching movies or shows, I'm fully present. I know everything that's happening, but I'm either getting something done in my head, or I'm processing my own life, and sometimes even taking notes and writing down quotes. Like I've always been that way. And she's like, that's not normal. And so I started realizing, as I started watching, being able to tolerate Hallmark movies more, how it helped me process my life even more and more. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really appropriate that the first show we're starting with is Three Wise Men and a Baby, because there were so many characters and so many different coping mechanisms that we could do that with. Lala, have you noticed when watching these Hallmark movies, even in the background, you can still tell there's this repeated trope with Hallmark female leads.
Yes.
Of this woman who is a list maker, people pleaser, codependent, planner, perfectionist. What am I missing? Like, need I say more? I 100% felt attacked. It's probably why I didn't like Hallmark movies. So we're going to talk about all this. And how did I go from considering these movies to be cringy to starting a podcast about Hallmark movies? Like, you have to understand, growing up, I wasn't like Lala. In my home, in my extended family, like nowhere in my circle of people did we have Hallmark movies playing in the background. In the background of the homes that I was in would be like A Christmas Story was the one that I think of that was repeated the most. And in my own home, my kids and I actually start in September. We kick off Christmas by watching A White Christmas or Elf, are always our first Christmas movies to kick off the season. And so these are the people I hang with. Like, if you don't know the lyrics of Sisters, or you've never seen Bing Crosby or Danny Kaye in Blue Tresses, then we can't hang. And if you want a movie or show playing in the background, I prefer watching shows like Somebody Feed Phil. And if you haven't listened to our trailer intro, again, go back and listen, because I have a PSA about this and my love letter to the Rosenthal family there. But Lala, was I the one that introduced you to Somebody Feed Phil?
Yeah. Just like last November.
Yeah, I think we were both having some kind of like family drama crisis
situation.
And we needed something light and fluffy to watch. See,
it was.
I can't even tell you how many times I recommend that show. So like, I like having shows play in the background while I get stuff done. Like, I'll watch The Office or Parks and Rec or Friends. Like, my ultimate is Gilmore Girls.
Yeah. Definitely.
right? Daniel and Amy Sherman Palladino are writing geniuses. So that just kind of gives you an idea of like, I like the more fast paced, witty writing that has so many references and doesn't stop to explain. Because that's all Hallmark movies, a lot of their writing is like, it's so much narration. There's so much explanation
True.
because it's like an hour-long movie. So they have to put it in there because how else are you going to know? But that was really hard for me to get through. That was so cringy for me because I'm used to the Daniel and Amy Sherman Palladino writing. So like, love the real life, but with twists and turns, with incredible humor. But then can we talk about Gilmore Girls for a minute? Because Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life, which if you guys aren't familiar with Gilmore Girls, that was like the reunion, the redo. I was looking so forward to it because all the years of being a Gilmore Girls fan, I knew that Amy Sherman Palladino, when she started Gilmore Girls, she knew what the last 4 words were going to be. And I could not wait to find out. But after watching all 4 seasons of A Year in the Life, a part of me died inside. And I won't get into all the details, but I felt like I needed group therapy after watching it. I mean, we could probably start a podcast on why it was a letdown, but that's not what we're doing here. But I legit needed to process it. So, anyways, that's why when I found Bran, Dan, and the friends at the Hallmark podcast, they were what I needed for Gilmore Girls, except for Hallmark movies. So Bran loves Hallmark movies. Dan hates Hallmark movies. They always have a friend that likes Hallmark movies, but I needed Dan. I needed the fact that Dan hates Hallmark movies and they're so truthful about all the plot holes and continuity issues. And all 3 of them comment on the wait what's of like, I need someone to confirm how ridiculous it was that they served veggie straws as a main course. Like, who else is going to pick that up? Because it wasn't the focus of the movie, but I did. So not only that, but I love that they're not a Christian podcast by any means, but to find a group that clearly isn't afraid to reference their churched Christian upbringing was so incredibly helpful for my soul. Like they'll just break out in a Stephen Curtis Chapman song or a worship song, like super randomly. So if I'm having a terrible day, I can put in my headphones and the level of joy that the Deck the Hallmark podcast brings me is just absolutely redonkulous. I love them so much. So after the Christmas season was over this last year, I literally continued to watch Hallmark movies just so I could continue to follow their podcast episodes. Up until then, I had only watched When Calls the Heart with my younger daughter because one of her BFFs was into it. So then I subscribed to the Hallmark channel only so that we could watch it with her mom and her friend, like as the live episodes were coming out. But Hallmark really got its foothold in my family. My older daughter discovered it, and our gateway drug was following Candace Cameron Bure on Fuller House. She's known as the Queen of Christmas. But then we also got into the Princess Switch movies on Netflix. So those 2 together is what led us to even more Hallmark movies. Because after getting through all the episodes of Fuller House and then the reruns of Full House, and the reason why we're doing this is because my daughter had had a lot, like multiple surgeries. She deals with nerve pain. And so you just have to have something light and fluffy to watch. And I like it that I didn't have to fully pay attention, but I still knew what was going on. And my daughter loved seeing DJ Tanner in Hallmark movies. So during COVID, I subscribed to watch Aurora Teagarden. But let me tell you, when you're sitting in a hospital or like a hotel room, because we'd have to travel for surgeries, where cell signal or Wi-Fi isn't working really well, and all you have is TV channels and Disney or Nick Jr.'s working, who do you turn on besides the Food Network, y'all? Hallmark movies. I basically went on this search for CCB, is how we refer to Candace Cameron Bure. We looked for CCB Hallmark movies for my daughter. And then I started realizing when I first started watching these Hallmark movies with her, it wasn't just cringy to me. I started to fall asleep. Like I couldn't stay awake during these Hallmark movies. I don't know what it was, you guys. I was glad at least I caught up on some sleep I needed because most of the Hallmark movies, I would tell friends like it feels like I'm wasting my life if I'm watching them, so I might as well be doing something else. But then I started doing this brain rewiring training with a friend of mine. most people that do this type of brain rewiring training has some kind of like toxic mold exposure or like just a lot of symptoms that doctors can't explain. And my friend was doing it for a physiological reason, and I was just kind of doing it along with her to support her, but I had a lot of benefits with my anxiety as well. And so she started telling me about how she was staying away from movies that would activate her nervous system too much. So it couldn't be too exciting, too suspenseful, too thrilling. Like I love movies like Inception or any action-packed suspenseful movie. You don't know what's going to happen next. Like I love those. And so I got to thinking, oh my goodness, is it possible that the reason I'm falling asleep during Hallmark movies is because it's a trauma response? And I literally can't stay awake because I can't handle the calm. And apparently I have a problem with love stories. So that got me curious. And so I started to screen some more Hallmark movies for my daughter. Like as we were watching more, I realized she likes the cheesier the script, the better. And I realized for people that are going through crisis or going through some type of recovering from illness or surgery, like the cheesier the better, right? Because you don't want to be triggered. And so she really appreciated things that were about the royals or dogs or cats. And as I was screening them, I started finding myself like I was watching ones that weren't about royals or dogs or cats, and I wasn't fast forwarding through them anymore. I started watching them without fast forwarding, and I even enjoyed a couple of them, and it shocked. I was like, oh my goodness, what is wrong with me? And then I started listening to Deck the Hallmark podcast, which leads us here today because now I have fallen in love with Hallmark, but also everything behind it. Okay, so Lala's going to share with us some fun facts, but tell me, Lala, I remember when I first came to you and I thought you were just being really polite about being excited about doing a Hallmark podcast. But there, you hit a couple points there where you're like, oh my goodness, I know I told you I was excited, but now I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Tell the people.
The passion arose, let's say, after watching The Way Home. And The Way Home, we, after Christmas, after we kind of get through the holiday frenzy, we're going to be recapping The Way Home, season 1. So good. So good.
So good.
We're hoping there's going to be a season 2. They're better. But, we talked a lot about how Hallmark had really helped you process, but I obviously being new and it just being very background had never experienced that. And funny enough, the first time we reviewed Three Wise Men and a Baby twice. The first time I watched it, just watching it, and I really got stuck on some of the Hallmark I hate to use the word corny or cheesy, but just I got stuck there.
Yes.
And so my perspective going into it was like, okay, we're reviewing these cheesy movies. Then I watched The Way Home. Okay. So this is what I have to say. Trauma touches each of us, whether we like it or not. It can be
100%.
significant or it can be subtle. And finding a way to address and heal from trauma, is essential. Watching The Way Home was a powerful processing tool for me to go through my experiences. And it's not that it was free from any corniness or whatever. Like there's always going to be an element of that, I think, when it comes to Hallmark. And you know what? You end up loving it. Like,
yeah,
it's a good thing. But beyond the surface of Hallmark, these films and these shows have transformative and therapeutic moments that if you decide to engage in them that way, then I think you will find that. And I think it was the first time where I realized, like, I remember there was just this scene and I don't know, the situation resonated so much and I felt like I was going through it. And that's kind of when it clicked for me. And I was like, okay, I get it. You got me. I love it. And I was really excited. So for me, that was the catalyst that really began. And even, moving forward, watching movies, I feel like I'm looking at it through a new lens.
So interesting. It's so not how I expected
Right?
this podcast to the direction for it to go. And honestly, I don't think you and I knew what direction this podcast was going. Like it took us recording a
No,
couple times and be like, whoa, where is this going?
I
And
know,
the
but
way, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, even like I'm loving it. And like seriously, I told my mom the other night, and and of course she has to love it because she's my mother. But she was like,
Aw.
this is amazing. And I really think that, people don't expect Hallmark to have these deep, powerful moments, but like I think you can find them in anything if you're choosing to like
Yeah.
look at it that way. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think I started with that thought, but now that I'm in it, I'm like, this is great.
And I have to say, you guys, when I started to watch The Way Home, which if you go online and you watch a trailer, I think one of the introductions, like the first line is like, what if you could meet your family before it fell apart or something to that effect? And it was just like the moment those words came out, I was like, ah, tears.
Right?
Um, immediately.
I'm unraveling as a person.
Exactly. But I just remember thinking when I first started watching the show, like up until that point, outside of When Calls the Heart, I wasn't watching any Hallmark shows, like just Hallmark movies with my kids. But then I started watching The Way Home by myself and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, oh my goodness, how have I changed this much? Like, who am I? What is wrong with me? So I assure all of you, The Way Home was actually written for Netflix. We'll talk about it. Be sure to come back. We hope that there's another season. We'll be reviewing it after all the holiday movies because we just have way too much content to get through over the holiday season, but we plan on doing it with the new year. You definitely want to follow along. So that's our plug on The Way Home. But looking deeper into these movies and then following podcasts and hearing more about the actors and actresses and the executives, the writers, just the Hallmark culture as a whole really puts so much more meaning. I don't think I would be a Hallmark fan without that. So we're going to pass it over to Lala for some fun facts about Hallmark and some history.
Nini, what do you think the most popular month is for Hallmark to film these Hallmark Christmas movies? Is it A, December, B, April, or C, July?
It is C, July.
Ding, ding, ding.
And for those of you who think it's the July the year before it comes out,
no.
Nope. You don't realize in so many of these Hallmark movies how great their acting is because they're actually sweating in the heat and the humidity of summer, but they have to make it look like they're shivering.
Number 2. Typically in the non-Hallmark world, it would take 2 years to film a movie and put it together. How long do you think it takes Hallmark to film a Christmas movie? Is it A, 3 months, B, 15 days, or C, 24 days?
B, 15 days.
Yes, that is unreal.
Isn't it so crazy to think about? Because when you think about that they're filming in July, you would think that they would be filming the July like an entire year and a half before the movie is showing. But no, I've heard, I think the shortest time frame I've heard is it started filming like the week of Thanksgiving, and that's the United States of America Thanksgiving, like in November, not the Canadian October Thanksgiving. So in November they're filming Thanksgiving week, and it's coming out before Christmas. It's not just filming in 15 days, you guys, is going through post, all the things. And I believe that's a Christopher Palaha movie. That's the shortest time frame I've heard of. Christopher Palaha is amazing. He's in a lot of the Hallmark movies and also Wonder Woman 1984, which I love. So I'm a huge fan. But anyways, I just think it's crazy because if you think about it, that's like an extra amount of pages of script per day. So I have so much more respect for the actors on these Hallmark movies because of how much script they're getting through.
Yeah.
And having a time frame of only 15 days means that you're not getting multiple takes.
I mean, it's basically like soap operas. They get the script that day.
Exactly, which is so funny that you mentioned this, because people like Jen Lilly and Ryan Pavey actually came from the soap opera world. So for them, they're like, oh, this is easy peasy because we do hundreds of pages of script a day that you get that morning. But it is different. It's a different challenge because on soap operas, it's multicam. The cameras aren't moving. So you're not having to set up, moving the set, and setting up and testing. But still, it is a ridiculous amount of pages of script a day and incredible amount of talent, because it's your first or second take that they're showing that in the final product.
Okay, a low budget Hollywood film can cost around $30 million all the way up to $200 million. How much do you think it costs Hallmark to film one of these movies? Is it A, 2 million, B, 10 million, or C, 20 million?
That would be A, $2 million.
Correct.
Okay, and these are facts that we're taking from the wonderful interwebs. I'm sure it's give or take. And I'm sure not every single Hallmark movie is in 15 days. I think some are in like 21 or 22. But
average.
This is this is their average. I think it's absolutely crazy. It revolutionized television and changed the game for made-for-TV movies.
Actually, Hallmark Channel Christmas movies are helping keep cable TV afloat.
Isn't that crazy? I think these types of Hallmark movies started around 2013. I know that the game really changed in 2009 when Bill Abbott took over at Hallmark, which he is now at Great American Family, which we will talk about later. But basically in November 2017, I feel like that was the year I started hearing more about Hallmark Christmas movies, because in that year, there's what are called Hallmark Hall of Fame movies. According to Wikipedia, in November of 2017, the Hallmark Channel beat all 4 major broadcast networks in the ratings in just one night with its Hallmark Hall of Fame movie, The Christmas Train. So there are Hallmark Hall of Fame movies that have an above average budget and production values that are closer to that of a normal feature film. Nevertheless, it totally changed cable TV. In fact, just last year in 2022, Three Wise Men and a Baby was the most watched cable TV movie of 2022. Like, of all the movies that came out on cable TV, a Hallmark movie was the most watched movie of 2022. This is huge because with so much streaming and some people who only subscribe to streaming and not cable TV, it was huge for the networks to be able to have something. So now you see even QVC and Food Network following suit and creating Hallmark-like Christmas movies for channels like QVC and Food Network. I haven't watched them, but they came out this year. And now you have Bill Abbott and Candace Cameron Bure, who switched focus and went to Great American Family Network. So it is spreading like wildfire, but we love it. I digress. Let's move on to the next fun fact.
Did you know that there's a psychological reason why Hallmark Christmas movies are so addictive? So it's like a drug. The Hallmark Christmas Channel movies provide a neurological reward. Pamela Rutledge is a behavioral scientist and director of the Media Psychology Research Center, explained that the formulaic plots and predictability of the films is so rewarding, especially when viewers are trying to unwind from stress. She says that the lack of reality on all levels, from the plot to production, signals to the brain that these movies are meant to be an escape and entertainment. This genre is so well defined and our expectations follow. This enables us to suspend our disbelief.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I love it, because when you listen to some of these podcasts about the Hallmark movies, these actors will talk about how even in their acting, there are really strict parameters that Hallmark has, because they have this down to a formula. So their happy can't be too happy, their sad can't be too sad, their angry can't be too angry, because there's a point. And I love it. I get it, especially when you have someone who's recovering from pain. The way that you feel emotions in your body is really important. And so I love that there's a reason for the same plot over and over again. Like, I used to hate it, but now I'm like, oh my goodness, I totally get it. Like that meme that goes around at Christmas of like the Hallmark movie machine or formulator, I can't remember what you call it, where it's like you pick from these different columns and you have a Christmas movie. I love it because someone who's recovering from, let's say, complex PTSD, like a codependent brain likes control and you like to know what to expect. You like predictability and not triggering. And so I appreciate the fact now that there are those strict parameters for actors with emotions, but then I also appreciate that there are different actors trying to push the envelope and that
Mhm.
there's a range of Hallmark movies now. Where like for my daughter, I look for those. The cheesier, the cornier, the better. Like I
Mhm.
think it was even I was listening to a Bill Johnson sermon and this was a while back, obviously, because he was talking about even when Benny Johnson was in her fight towards the end of her life, they watched Hallmark movies on the daily and he was joking about it. So I appreciate that. And there are so many stories that come in from Hallmark fans about what Hallmark movies meant in their life, like what season of life, tough season of life that it helped them get through. So, anyways, I love the psychology. I love the people. This is what I mean when I say like it's so much more meaningful when you find out about the people behind it and the Hallmark culture because it's actually become a thing now where Hallmark is known as a wonderful company to work for. Actors and actresses want to work on a Hallmark movie even though it may not pay the same as a larger budget film, but you see people going back and forth like the game has changed and I love it. So even when you find out more about the business, Lala, what do you have for us about Hallmark corporate and just the culture and the story of Hallmark?
Um, okay. So Hallmark Cards believes that when you care enough, you can change the world. I love that slogan. I believe that. That's why they are dedicated to creating a more emotionally connected world and making a difference in the lives of others. So Hallmark was founded in 1910 by a teenager. Let that sink in. A teenager who was an entrepreneur, J.C. Hall. And the Hallmark remains a private company to this day with family members on the board of directors. Hallmark's business employs more than 20,000 people worldwide. It's actually headquartered in Kansas City and has a diverse portfolio of businesses. In 1951, NBC approached Hallmark about sponsoring the first original opera created especially for television. Amal and the Night Visitors, J.C. Hall decided to sponsor the program to thank all the people who had bought Hallmark cards. The opera aired on Christmas Eve and moved viewers to send thousands of letters and cards and telegrams thanking Hallmark for presenting it. This would be the first in the series of specials that would become the Hallmark Hall of Fame. In the over 60 years following, Hallmark Hall of Fame productions have won 81 Emmy Awards. The National Academy of Television and Arts Sciences has presented 2 Emmy Awards to Hallmark as a sponsor. By the time the company's name was officially changed from Hall Brothers to Hallmark Cards in 1954, the tradition of entrepreneurship and innovation started by J.C. Hall was deeply ingrained. Thank you, Hallmark website, for providing that wonderful information.
So that all plays into why I love Hallmark movies so much and why we are starting a podcast about Hallmark movies and the occasional Asian drama. So it inspired a 1 a.m. random whiteboard session in my own mind. And I decided to jot some segment ideas down for a podcast, which apparently stuck. So we're going to share with you some of the segments that we're going to be using for reviewing these Hallmark movies. Are you ready for this?
Go for it.
Drum roll, please. All right. So there's 4 segments. The first one is called What's Love Got to Do with It? Give me a riff.
What's love got to do? We'll get a royalty strike against us. Copyright disclaimer.
That's it. That's all we got. This is where we pull out the glimmers, the fluffy egg parts, what we love, and actually ended up being where we break down the romantic and family relationships. So we'll talk about things that we love. And the second segment, we have, yeah, don't go chasing waterfalls. This is where we'll talk about unhealthy behaviors and coping mechanisms that we have observed in these movies. And sometimes we'll pull out the omo omo nardar. I know that omo omo is Korean. I'm not Korean, but watching Korean dramas, you pick up on a lot of their terms. And I had a lot of Korean friends growing up. But the nardar stands for narcissistic radar. And I have this love-hate relationship with how much there is floating on the internet about narcissistic behavior. I think the term is overused in some unhelpful ways, but in other ways it's really helpful because I know so many people, if they didn't have the awareness on the internet, they wouldn't have been able to come out of covert abusive relationships. But we go about it in a really satirical way. It kind of surprised me how it came out, especially with the first episode, so you don't want to miss it. We won't pull it out every time, but we will pull out the omo omo, I don't want no scrubs, nardar. The third segment is Aigu, oi with the poodles already. If you're not a Gilmore Girls fan, you don't know where that came from, but I actually found it in the Urban Dictionary. It's something that Lorelai said in season 2, episode 22, when Lorelai mentions that oi and poodle are two of the funniest words in the entire world. And if you put them together in a sentence, you'd have a catchphrase that's knocking what you talking about, Willis, right out of first place. It's an inside joke, but oi with the poodles already is basically where we're looking for plot holes, continuity issues, the wait what's, as they say on the Deck the Hallmark podcast, things we didn't like. We put that all in there as well. The fourth and last segment is Dayo fighting. Jayo is something that we say in Mandarin that a direct translation would be like, add more fuel. It's like what you'll hear people cheering from the sidelines for like sporting events or anything, or like if you're going through a hard time in life, we'll encourage each other by saying jayo. And then in Korean dramas, if you watch any of them, you'll know that the way that they encourage one another is with a hand gesture where it's like similar to when you have kids that want the semi trucks as they're on a road trip, you know, and a semi truck goes by and they want them to honk. It's kind of like a similar hand movement where you say fighting. And that is our happily ever after segment, like jayo, fighting, who we want to live happily ever after, what we think happens after the movie, who we're rooting for, so on and so forth. Those are our 4 segments. And then I'll pass it on to Lala to tell you about the ratings.
Before our ratings, we're actually going to give you a plot summary of the movie. So feel free to join us, whether you've watched the movie or not. You can take a listen. And then based on the plot summary, based on us watching, we are going to give it a rating. And here is our rating system. So we are going to be rating the writing out of 10 bobas because we love bubble tea so much. Characters out of 10 bobas. How much this movie made us laugh out of 10. And then we're going to give it our overall rating. So overall, how did we feel? And let me tell you, it's actually the best. We don't share our ratings beforehand. So coming into it, it's always surprising to see what score we gave it. It's my favorite part.
It's so true. I don't think any of this podcast went how I thought it was going to. I think it's better.
Nothing.
I love it. What a surprise. And how poetic. When we decided, I had no idea how this was going to play out, but we kept pushing the launch date back. I just think it's so poetic that our Breaking Script podcast is going live on 9/11, and our first official episode doesn't air until after Rosh Hashanah. So an early Shana Tova to whoever celebrates, and thanks for listening today.
Thanks for joining us today. We can't wait to have you break script with us next time on
the Breaking Script podcast with Lala and Nini.